Okay, Josh's prosperity gospel versus the world hating us as Christians. That's our forward for today, and an example of this situation is going to come up in our story. So that's why it's being brought up right now. I just want to talk about this before we read because I don't want to interrupt our study at that point. It's just like a small little lesson in there when we read the story. So I'm going to talk about it now. Josh's prosperity gospel. First of all, let me clarify what that means. I am often saying, via a lot of Bible, like there's a lot of biblical evidence for this, that following God and doing what He says will often bring you respect and success in a secular world. I don't like prosperity gospel like, if you pray and pay your tithes, God will give you a bunch of money. That is a misconception of what God's view of prosperity is. Right? That's not real prosperity, it's financial prosperity. But I think the Bible does talk a lot about if you follow God and obtain these qualities that God wants us to obtain, you're going to be respected a lot of the time, even outside of the church, by everyone. Right? Qualities like honesty, love, charity, hard work, knowledge and wisdom and humility, those all go a long way universally. Right? In most cultures, in most places, those things are all good things. And if God tells you, hey, be charitable, be hardworking, be smart, be excellent, right? Those things are all good, right? So I'm often saying, hey, there's a lot of prosperity that comes from following God. When you are truly, fully invested in God, the steps that God leads you in is often either mostly a spiritual or emotional or societal prosperity. Following God garnishes people with respect. But Jesus says that the world will probably hate us. How do we reconcile these two things? Right? So Christian tradition, which I largely reject this dialogue a lot. Right? Christians are always saying it doesn't matter if no one outside of the church respects you because the world hates us. Right? Because it hated Jesus. And then they cite this verse. But then how does that compute with all of this stuff that we're always talking about here about if you follow God, you have all these good qualities that most people typically like. So what's this about? Who's wrong? Well, we're going to find out in this story. Here's this verse, John chapter 15 that I'm referencing. It says this. It starts in verse 18. If the world hates you, this is Jesus talking to His disciples. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. This is why the world hates you. Remember what I told you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they obeyed my teaching, they will obey yours also. So what's this about? How do we reconcile these two things? Okay, I'm going to break it down super quick, and we're not going to spend a week on this, but I just want to kind of clarify it because it's something that comes up quite often. So first of all, this is another sermon for another time. If I had more time to break down what Jesus was actually talking about with the world here, I'd probably clarify it a lot. But typically when Jesus does talk about the world, He's talking about people that are completely ruled by Satan or completely selfish or have directly objected to God. Right? It's people that are completely apart from God. So I don't think that Jesus here is talking about every secular person. Right? Jesus isn't saying, hey, if you follow me, every single secular person is going to hate you. Right? I don't think that's what He's saying. First of all, He starts off this speech with, if the world hates you. So there's the first thing about, I don't think the world is every secular person. And Jesus isn't saying, even says that won't happen all the time. It's if the world hates you, it's probably because of Jesus, is what He's saying, if you have all these qualities of God. Another thing with that is a lot of secular people love Jesus, right? He had mobs and mobs and mobs of people coming after Him trying to listen to His teaching. So even in His own life, it's disproved that every secular person is going to dislike you because Jesus was a huge deal, right? People at His time flocked to Him because He healed them and said all these amazing heavenly things that they hadn't heard from anyone else. Right? So if you're really reflecting Jesus, then you'll have mobs of people coming after you too. It's just part of our life. So then how do we reconcile these two things? Because it seems like, yes, okay, following God brings you this, garnishes you respect typically in a lot of different societal circles. So what's this about with the world hating you? And here's my main thesis for, Josh, look at your notes, I'm glad I had that on there. That's just for me. It's not for anybody else. I always forget to do that. Here's my point. Following God develops, typically, universally admired qualities in a person, like we've already said. But here's what Jesus is saying. But people following God aren't universally admired. Right? If we have all these qualities that like everyone thinks is good, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to like us. Right? Even though it would make sense for them to do so because God's way is the best way. Right? According to us. That's what we think when we study God. But you being a Christian won't bring you universal affirmation. You could be the perfect Christian, and here's my point. You could do it. You could be fully invested in God. You could be a perfectly godly person, following Jesus, doing it all right in the Christian way. And there are still going to be people who will despise you, right? Who do not like you. And Jesus is saying, that's okay. Hey, don't use this as something that validates your faith that people like you or not, because people hated me, right? People crucified Jesus. And that's kind of, I think, the point. We'll see both of them come true in David's life. David had a ton of people that liked him because of the qualities that he got from following God. But then there are other people that wanted to kill him, right, for those same qualities. And we're going to see a little bit of that today. Okay, so that's my forward. It's just a little bonus sermon that will come up when we read the story. But let's get to